coming to the last slide on RSCL, which is answering the question I had posed in the first slide for RSCL. So what is the PE, right? The 2-year forward PE was 1 or 1.4. And I have estimated that by observing that their current quarter PAT is around 12 crore. And when I had bought it at that point in June 20, it was a 70 crore market cap company. So essentially the 2-year forward PE ratio is around 1.4, right? So I've rounded it to 1. But basically imagine, so when we ask, one of the greats of investing, Warren Buffett, how do you value companies? And then when you see what people say around this, basically what they say is they've almost never seen Warren use a Excel or a reverse DCF, right? It has to hit you on the head with a 4x4 is what Warren says. And I think this was one such opportunity. All we needed at that point was the ability to look in the right places and having the right appreciation for the quality of the company. So I think with that, Ankit, maybe we can take a short break and maybe some questions from what we had discussed, right? And then we can go to the next case study.
Sure. Sahil, so I'll just, I have a few questions related to RSCL, but I would first want the audience, if anyone wants to ask any question, you can raise your hand and I'll unmute you, because I don't see any questions on the chat box. Okay, sure. So I don't see any questions right now. Yeah, so Bhajan, you have raised your hand. I have unmuted you. You may go ahead.
Hello,
yeah, go ahead.
Sir, how you filtered this company back 2 years ago?
So, I mean, essentially, see what happens is there are multiple ways. In fact, I've written a whole thread on like how one can do that or how I had done it. 2 ways, right? 2 very clear ways. One, specifically, especially in bear markets, we should just write a lot of screens. So I literally wrote a screener which said, show me companies which have grown 15% in the last 1 year, 3 year, and so forth, which have at least a 15% ROCE and a single digit PE multiple, right? And I generally put a market cap filter also that it should be something between 100 and 2000 crore market cap, because in that way we find companies which might not already be appreciated by the market. And when I do that, I get like 100 companies and then you just quickly go through all of them. So one of the very initial screens I have on top of screener is I look for the value picker thread of that company. If I know that there is a value picker thread, that's a big bonus for me, because that means I don't actually have to go through a lot of years of annual report as the first thing, right? I can just go through the value picker thread, which might take me 2 to 3 hours to go over 10 years of history, or how many ever years of history we have.
Bhajan, I guess that answers your question.
Yes, yes, thank you.
So now I see a few questions on the chat box, so I'll take them. So Sashikant asks, why do RACL and other auto ancillaries have better ROCE? Is it due to less depreciation and high fixed asset turn? Is ROCE actually a good metric?
I think that's a very wonderful question, and it strikes at the heart of being able to understand businesses. So one thing that we have to understand in general, if I can give a parallel, that the GDP growth of a country is an outcome. It's not an input, right? You cannot plan for 7% growth. What you can do is to create the policy framework that allows that kind of growth. And similarly, so that's macroeconomic, and now coming to microeconomics. If you look at companies, ROCE and ROE are the outcomes of the business capabilities, and most importantly, something known as Porter's 5 forces. So if you look at basically what is a business, it is a competition for profit pools, right? And in fact, you might think in a first level of approximation that your competition is with other people selling gears, right? But that's not the case. Your competition is with your suppliers, it is with your buyers, it is with your competitors, it is with the threat of substitution of other products, which may not be your direct competitors, right? So there are lots of these things that one has to think about. So basically, ROE and ROCE generally show that people are willing to pay for the value that you're adding to the value chain, right? And the reason that some auto ancillaries have low ROE is because what the market, the when I say market, not the stock market, uh, uh, the main street or the economy, the feedback that they're giving them is you're not adding too much value. This can be done by 10 different companies. So why must I pay you a premium, right? But if we look at the kind of precision engineering skills RSCL has there, so basically they need to be able to make these gears to the precision of microns, right? It has to be the precisely right size of the gear. You can't make it to the precision of even a millimeter, right? So those kind of skills are rare, and that is why companies are willing to pay for it. And there's another way to think about it, right? If you think about it from the viewpoint of BMW or KTM, they're going to sell a $20,000 or euro bike, right? Perhaps the amount of these gears and gear shaft assemblies might be, let's say, 2% of that $2,000. $20,000. That's still not a lot. That's like $400. Imagine that RSCL says, I don't want $400 for these gears. I want $440. BMW will say, okay, that's okay with me because the overall product cost doesn't go up that much. Number one. Number two, it's a critical application. If the gear fails, then your bike can crash, and basically they don't want that either. And number three, it's the willingness of the end consumer to pay. So, I mean, that is why we must always value, I think, in my opinion, companies that are part of value chains where the end consumer has a high willingness to pay, right? For example, if you look at Tesla's, any company which is a part of Tesla was always valued very highly, precisely because the Tesla end consumer was willing to pay for it. Similarly, any company which is a part of the iPhone value chain also gets valued highly, precisely because iPhone users are willing to pay for it, right? That willingness to pay is what leads to the higher ROCEs and ROEs.
Thanks. That was a very good answer, Sahil. So I see a couple of more questions. So one question is again related to RACL per se. When will your thesis of, so Ashwin asked this question, when will your thesis of RACL go for a toss? Few points, as in he's asking for an antithesis of
Yeah,
RACL.
yeah. So, I mean, there are lots of things which can go wrong, right? So, I think one of the most important things to appreciate is that the businesses are extremely dynamic. We just have a very rough and approximate view of what's happening, right? It's not possible for anyone to model precisely what is happening at any point in any industry or even for a company. The reason is there are so many moving parts which we can't even, fully cognitively understand. Um, in this case, for example, there could be some gear maker coming up in Thailand with the aspirations of being able to supply to KTM and BMW at 1/5 the cost, right? And if they are really able to crack that, then RSCL thesis goes for a toss. So I think the first thing is to have the intellectual humility to know that the thesis can go wrong, right? And then the second thing is we have to either look for the numbers to come. So for example, if they stop delivering good numbers either on growth or on ROE, that would be a clear breaking down of the thesis. The second thing which I'm personally worried about as an investor is that, if you look at the way that the end market is moving to EV and what they are able to do for EV, or let's say the gear agnostic part of the portfolio, right? That is one thing that I'm tracking like a hawk. Because the worry is, let's say in the next 5 to 7 years, if the end market completely shifts to EV, then one thing that will happen is that the number of gears required will go down dramatically, right? And even though RSCL says that the precision of the gears will go up because we want it to be a noiseless vehicle, so it has to be even more precise. But I don't think that they will be able to compensate for the volume drop by increasing the gross margins or the gross profits per gear. So that basically the volume falling off a cliff is another big antithesis. But I think one more thing to keep in mind is these are extremely small companies. Even if it does 500 crore of revenue, it's not a lot, right? And I think the canvas is large. Even in this space of where they operate, there's probably enough headroom for like $1 billion of outsourcing, right? So what that means is it's possible that that billion goes to $500 million, but RECL expands from 500 crore to 1,000 crore. So like I was saying, it's a very dynamic thing, right? It's possible that the overall industry shrinks, but in that shrinking industry, one of the efficient players is able to gain market share. So we have to basically look at the balance of these factors all the time.
Thanks, Sahil. So, Shashikant asks how to understand the terminal value of a company. As in, let's say there is any company in the sunset industry. For example, he says that RACL is here in the powertrain agnostic business. How to value a company which works only in, let's say, IC engine sector?
So in response to this, I will, and my investing journey, of course, is very early. Like I'm still early in that journey. I'm only like hardly like 4 years of practicing and maybe 6 years of reading, because for the first couple of years I just used to read a lot of understanding this space, right? So I'm going to heavily quote from the giants of the investing world. So one quote that comes to mind is Vijay sir's quote, Vijay Kedia sir's quote, that I will stay out of the sunset industry at any cost, and I will stay inside a sunrise industry at any cost. So basically, when we come to risks, there are two ways to manage risk. One is to choose to not manage a risk, to say that I will not get exposed to this risk at all, right? So personally, the way I think about it is any kind of sunset industry, I'm not interested in, right? So that's the simple answer.
Sure, Sahil. So I'll ask one last question and then maybe you can
Yeah.
go to your presentation. Shivam asked this question. How do you evaluate companies in industries that you are not familiar with? And what are some of the key factors you look for when assessing new investment opportunities? Since understanding and researching about a company can take months, and then there's a chance the opportunity is gone. So how to act in this scenario? I think it's a very relevant and practical question. Yeah.
Right. So can you repeat the first part once more?
So he's saying, how do you tackle or how do you try to understand, evaluate companies where you're not familiar with? What are the key factors you look for while assessing new investment?
Right. So actually, that's a great question. And one thing I want to add is that, like, first thing that we have to do is to understand the value chain of the company. It's not just about understanding a company, but rather the value chain. So one clear thing that we can do is to study the industry leaders to understand what's happening at the top. The second thing, of course, we can do is to understand that company by reading its annual report, by reading its investor presentations. But I think equally important and slightly open-ended thing that has to be done is to understand it from the industry participants. So let's say distributors, clients, suppliers. And just to be clear, this is, like you rightly said, an open-ended process that takes months and months and months. For example, one of the companies called Xpro, which I was researching, and I made a thread about it. I'm still, talking to their clients. So I'm talking to their clients and I'm asking them, why do you buy, capacitor films from Xpro? Why not buy it from their competitors? So this is always an open-ended kind of a process. But I do want to point out that there is this thing which applies, which is called Pareto principle or the power law, where basically 80% of the understanding can potentially come in 20% of the time, but that end 20% might take 80% of the time to come. So I think that was a very roundabout answer. So I think the second part of your question, answering that will help clarify the first part as well, which is what do I look for in a company? So I think the first thing is I want to be able to predict the cash flows and the profit pools and the evolution of those cash flows and profit pools. So, without taking names, I was evaluating a company. What I figured out is that what it makes is nothing unique, and that exact same product is made by 10 other companies and they're indistinguishable, right? I'm not interested in that, because then it becomes very hard to predict how this thing will pan out, right? But with a company like RSCL, we have something unique. We don't have another Indian company that works with the same set of clients, that does multi-year design and development processes and then supplies multiple parts to multiple end products and keeps increasing their revenues at 20%, right? So I think basically what I look for is uniqueness. In fact, if you also look at the way that Michael Porter defines competition, or like what is competition, what he says is competition is basically the process of becoming unique. Every company must understand in what way am I unique and in what way can I add value to my user's life that other companies can't add. So basically what I look for is uniqueness in a company.
Thanks, Sahil. That really helped. And I think you can go back to your presentation now.